Thanks for listening to Fluff and Crunch, where we talk about the connection and sometimes disconnect between system, setting, and story in tabletop RPGs. On this computer, and we're recording now. So we're going to talk about, well, actually, wait, I'm supposed to say hello, Chris.
Hi, Jeremy.
And we're supposed to do that. And how are you? Oh,
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well. I'm well. Got any gaming in over the last week?
It's always that thing of when did we last record? It was a week ago, wasn't it? Yes, we played. What did we play? So we played D&D. Who was running? Was I running? Wow, this is like 3 days ago or something.
I don't know.
Well, because I have my adventure. This is the thing. When I started, at one point, I was going to write up a session, and all I was doing was sort of writing up the adventure. But instead of saying this is, part of my notes for me, I was just writing that up in like past tense, and I was like, oh, this is
okay.
It felt like writing a report, and I was like, I'm not.
That sounds fun.
This is not fun. This is like for the benefit of like you'd been asking me on the Discord, and like 2 people might read it on the blog. I was like, yeah, all I'm doing is writing up my adventure notes.
Yeah.
Well, no, I'm rewriting my adventure in the past tense with names of characters in. I was like, yeah, this is not fun. I'm not doing this, so I haven't done it. So yeah, I ran a third session where we massively were. So now I've sprung it to a much bigger thing. They had someone else turn up and go, well, we've got a mission for you. And I was like, they're not going to go for this. I've screwed them over twice now. And they did go for it, which was amazing because I had a backup plan. And we decided in our world, right at the start when we did our world, we said, right, we're going to use Earth gods because we know who they are. We know what they stand for, and we don't have to make up our own. So I had Anubis, because he's cool, turn up and kind of go, this empire, we don't like the empire either. The empire are like outlawing worship, and they're taking away our power because if people aren't worshiping, we'll lose power. And we know you're against the empire, so we want you to sort of work for us, and we'll help you out and stuff. And they were like, yeah, okay, maybe. And then basically had them sort of go through a portal, so they were in like an Egypt, because we haven't really named it. We just realized we don't need to name areas and map everything out. We just need to be, you go somewhere and this is what it looks like. And if you get to a city, that's the name of the city. So
yeah,
like in the past, the amount of times I would map out the entire world, and you think I don't need to do that. That's pointless. Anyway, and then they had sort of this. I co-opted. Brian's playing a ranger. I co-opted his ranger as now like a conduit of the gods to be able to pass them messages and make him look like a jackal instead of whatever animal he looked.
Oh, that's cool. I always dug Anubis. The Egyptian gods, for whatever reason, I always thought Anubis was the coolest.
That's why I started with him. So I was like, right, your wolf, your like owl turns down, and then he turns into a black jackal, and he goes, oh, I can talk now. I have some knowledge of the gods, and I can pass messages to and from, which I thought were useful. So it means like now his companion is actually like a talking member of the party, but Brian controls him in combat as his ranger companion. And then basically he goes, oh, yeah, Anubis missed something. The other gods don't trust you. They want to do these trials. And I hadn't actually added up the numbers. I'd basically been going through the back of the player's handbook, writing down names of gods, and then picking a trial. Like some of them are simple. Some of them are really just like, you fight a giant crocodile, and there's a woman who's ill in this village, and you have to, most of them was simple, like one skill encounters, super straight. It ended up being like 15 different gods. And there was a journey to a pyramid, and there was a sandstorm. And I was literally just ticking off these gods, but they went through all these. And then I took some of the puzzles out of that Tasha's Cauldron book, and that was some of the like the wisdom type gods. And they get to it, and at the end, like Osiris or Ra, or one of them turns up and kind of says, yeah, well done, you passed all the challenges, we like you now. And that was it. So now it's going to go off in another direction. So they'll probably still be doing dungeon crawling, but now they're dungeon crawling on behalf of the Egyptian gods because they're lacking power and the empire's bad. But they were happy. They were like, oh, this is cool, we're now in with the gods. So cool. That was good. Everyone enjoyed it. More puzzles out of Tasha's Cauldron. Eventually I'll run out of them.
Getting use out of books and having a good time around a table. That's good.
Yeah.
We had another session after having a week off. We had another session of the 5e campaign that we're doing. And, as I have to remember this as a player, that there's time it takes to develop a story. for the you as the player start to get background knowledge and prior knowledge and be able to use it to contribute to the story in a very specific way rather than just generic questions or ideas. And so we're starting to identify some of the players and some of the factions and things like that, and it's been good. And then I think we're about, this is just a guess, I think we're about to take a step forward in terms of like a campaign hallmark or chapter or something. I think we might be on the verge of finding something out that will help propel us into more adventure and danger and stuff like that. So yeah, it's been good. Anyway, so I've taken all my GM headspace of late. What's nice is I don't have weekly planning to do. So that's an advantage. I enjoy that to an extent, I mean, whatever, but I do. But now I'm using all that headspace to bang my head on a wall over developing a magic system that is to my liking and works for my game. And I'll talk to you about that offline. But let's go ahead and move to our subject for today. And now you said you don't.
You were just talking about 5e.
I was.
And that's how we got into it, because you last week at the end, after we'd finished recording, sort of started having a bit of a moan about 5e combat. And I said, actually, I think the stuff you're moaning about isn't 5e combat. It's just combat. It's just straight up role-playing combat.
So that is what we're going to talk about today, then. What we hate about combat. Not that we necessarily hate combat, but what we hate about it. The things that pop up that make combat suck.
Yeah. Because I generally don't. I like combat is one of my highlights of role-playing games.
Sure.
Like, although I started with role-playing games before I moved into wargaming, I've done a reasonable amount of wargaming over the years, and I can quite happily play a role-playing game as a more of a wargaming or board gaming experience.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, I've done that with Pathfinder 2e. We've done no role-playing. It's just been dungeon crawling. So that's my bit. There are plenty of times when I'm like, that's annoying me.
There aren't many games wherein combat is not a regular feature. There are some, but not many. And there aren't many games wherein the combat is actually not a good idea, or not like call it an A-list viable option for solving problems, gaining information, whatever. Like Call of Cthulhu is a great example of it. Trail of Cthulhu is another one. Star Trek Adventures. I've run plenty of sessions where there's been no combat. It's just the vibe. But in most games, especially fantasy games, their combat plays a very prominent role. And in a lot of ways, it sucks.
Yes.
It sucks. So
we said that, we're going to do an episode on that, and then we'll do a separate episode on how to fix some of these problems, or systems that have had ideas about fixing these problems as well.
So what we have to do is be disciplined. We're going to be very focused on what sucks, and then we'll have a separate episode, wherein we talk about our ideas as to how to solve those things in a general sense, but then also for specific games. So yeah, you're right. 5e is the segue, but you're right. There are things that in particular that I don't like about 5e combat, but unfortunately these kinds of things pop up all over the place.
It's going to be quite difficult. I said, like, it's not, these aren't 5e problems, but actually if we start going through, here's the solution to that, it was going to take too long. So this may end up being quite negative, this episode, and we probably will accidentally go a bit into,
we won't.
Because, but
you know what I'll do? If we do, I'll just delete those things, and there'll be these odd cuts where we're like, it'll be like Max Headroom. No, not going to do it. So what's the first thing that you hate about combat? What's the first boogeyman for combat that you loathe?
All right. Well, I will go first then, even though this was your fault. But
unless you'd like me to go first,
I will go first with a different, because it's a different one we used. The thing I hate about combat is where players just kind of go, I hit it with, and there's nothing more than that. It's it's just I attack, and they kind of they're not going to describe anything about what they're going to do. They're not going to try and do anything interesting. They're not going to try and change or do anything other than just there's a baddie. I know I can damage it. I want to do, it's literally I attempt to damage bad guy. How do I do that? Let I do that. And that's the one that bugs me. There's just a bit like, and then so all you have is a combat which ends up becoming player one says I attack, player two says I attack, I go and monsters attack, and you just think that, yeah, because at that point you kind of think, oh, we could have just solved this entire combat. We're going, right, the players win. This is how much damage you took in total.
Yeah, I
Because it's just
described that. That was
boring.
actually one of my. That's one of my top things. Is and that's a player thing. That's actually not a.
Yeah.
That's not a system thing. No
Nope.
game forces you to be lame like that.
Nope.
That is a player thing. That is a lazy player thing. I do think that some systems and some call them game traditions, uh, not incentivized, but that's more the norm, you know? And so it's easier for the player to be lazy without recognizing that he or she's being lazy. But yeah, I hate that. And what to me that turns a role-playing game into just a game. You know, if you're going to if you're playing Monopoly, which is like the worst board game on the planet, if
Pretty
you're
much.
playing Monopoly and you roll the dice and you move to the Reading Railroad, you just say, "I buy the Reading Railroad," and that's all that's necessary. You don't need to describe walking into the office or securing the funds or negotiate. Blah, 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 blah. There is you. It's just you do that. That's it. And when players do that, it kind of makes me twitch. Um, and yeah, it's just like like 20 years ago, 20 some years ago, there was a vampire game that I was running, and there was this one guy who was in the game who he was playing a Ventru who had absolutely no personality whatsoever. And you know, sometimes like snarky lines become part of your game group lore.
Yeah.
I don't know if they do that for you, but there was he would just be like, I remember when one session it came to him, we say, okay, what do you do? And he just said, I dominate him. And all of us looked at him and like, well, what do you do? I dominate him. And that was it. And so that was the joke. Like that had been the joke for years after that. After that guy left, we are like, I dominate him. You know, just like, okay, just give me the dice and boom, I'll just roll the dice. And do I win? So yeah, that's a tough one. I do think that uh, highly detailed, leaning toward attempts at simulationist systems, especially grid-bound systems. I think they encourage that because they suck the attention away from the story and toward the mechanics, and they encourage. In order to surf the mechanics to win, they encourage players to focus on those things, which then means they're not devoting headspace to this is what my character is doing. It's more like this is what my little figure on the map is doing. So that's yeah, when people they just treat it like a game. It's just a mechanical moment and that's it. I can't stand that.
Your turn.
My turn. Okay. This is two-pronged. I'm not a fan of waiting. I am unfortunately a by nature impatient person and I have to work on that always. But combat systems that are highly detailed, where there are so many mechanical choices to make, which then I think they encourage people, they incentivize players to focus on mechanical synergies, which is what I would call like chicken shit and like piddly little, you know, those kinds of things. That it slows combat down so much on a player by player basis, including the GM. It slows things down so that you sit there and wait. Like I have been, and I, you know, 4E was the worst of this, but I'd been in like, you know, Pathfinder first edition high level combats that I was running where it would be, you know, 10 or 15 minutes before it would come back around to someone, maybe even longer in a 4-person party, which is bonkers. And when you have systems in which there is, aside from, well, I mean, this is courtesy, sitting and paying attention actively while your friends, hopefully, are taking their turns, for systems that where there's nothing else aside from that hope, people just check out. So yeah, the waiting when it comes to long drawn out combat encounters as a player is maddening. Because you're just sitting there.
Yeah, I can't. like I said, when we had this conversation, I said that was the thing that killed playing 5e in a bigger group for me when I was a player. Like I say, this was online a year or so ago, where with 4 players in the thing, I was just bored. I wasn't interested in what happened because everyone was just going, I hit, or I use this spell or whatever. And I was just waiting for my turn. And when you've got 4 players plus a bunch of monsters, waiting for your turn can seem like a long time. Well, we had this conversation of actually 2 players is quite good, or 3 players is quite good. You're almost always like in 3 players, you're either the last player or you're the next player, or you're playing. And okay, monsters throws it off a bit, but still that's, but yeah, waiting because you're not doing anything. You're just doing nothing.
Well, and the trouble is that, especially again, back to detailed simulationist systems, you may, in order to, and this becomes like a factor that kind of devours itself, you may, out of a desire to be snappy on your turn, you're paging through your character sheet, or heaven forbid, you're paging through a rule book, trying to figure something out for what you're going to do next so that you can be ready, so that you don't bog down the works. But then you're ignoring the other people in your party. Yeah. Like I at this game club that I sponsor at this high school nearby, I watched a game just last week where there were 4 players and the kid GMing. The kid GMing is like reading his highly descriptive, frustrated author prose, describing a scene. And one kid was, until it became each of their turns, they weren't paying attention. And part of that was a courtesy issue, but another part of it was just the mechanics of it. So, waiting and having nothing to do and almost being incentivized to look elsewhere to be ready, that wrecks. Like for me, anything that detracts from the story is a point of frustration.
Back to me then. Right.
Back
so
to
you keep saying like these simulationist or in-depth things, which is funny because I for me 2D20 is worse than 5e for some of this stuff. And actually I can think of narrative system. And so the thing I'm gonna say is any system where there's like a best way to play it. So not necessarily min-maxing, but like a gaming the system thing. So I see this in 2D20, particularly with momentum, like, right, how that it gets very, very meta. And this is the criticism that people level at 2D20 and they are bang on. You come to do an attack, right, I'm going to attack the bad guy. All right, how many dice should I buy with momentum? How many dice should I buy with threat? Then they roll the dice. Right, how many momentum do I get? Right, now having got this, how much momentum should I spend myself? How much momentum should I keep for the rest of my team? What should I spend my momentum on? Should I do an extra attack? Or actually, is it more efficient to do extra damage? Or should I hit these 2 people? And none of these end up being story choices. It's all just the game. And actually D&D compared to that, I'm going to decide the thing I'm going to do. I'm going to roll the dice. I hit, I damage. That's it. So 2D20 then ends up other things. But this isn't just 2D20. This is any system where there's lots of meta stuff. So I've seen the same thing in Fate, because you'll have, right, I'm struggling to hit this bad guy. I need to create they're not called distinctions. That's cortex. I'll come to that in a second. Aspects. I need to create an aspect. How am I going to create this aspect? Am I better off doing it this way or this way? Now I've created this aspect. Right, on my next turn, well, I can tag that aspect for free. Having tagged that aspect for free, that gives me +2 on my roll. Oh, but now I need to spend. And the people are completely, there's no story there. It's the using the set. Like, and cortex was also horrendous for this. Because you kind of had this thing, right, before I roll, I'm going to spend a plot point to add an extra one of the, I remember playing Marvel Heroic, and this is what I really enjoyed the principle of it. It killed it for me actually playing it, because someone rolling dice in Marvel Heroic could go, right, which distinction I'm using this? I am heroically blah, 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 I have fancy hair. Right, I'm in a team dice. Which superpower? I'm going to use this superpower. Oh, wait a minute, this SFX thing works. That says if I'm doing this, I get an extra. That's an extra. That's my 4th dice. My next superpower. Okay, that's this thing. Okay, great. This thing's relevant as well. I got this. Wow, I've got this pool of 7. I'm going to roll the 7 dice. I'm going to spend a plot point to increase this dice. Okay, spend a point. Rolls all the dice. I'm going to include 2. Right, I'm going to spend another plot point to include 3 dice. And you think, this is ridiculous. There's no I've seen people play it well where they're like, Batman heroically uses his Dark Knight distinction to swoop down. You can describe it better and it sounds much cooler. But when someone's not familiar with the system, it becomes an exercise in collecting a lot of dice into a big pool, rolling it, and working out how many of your currency you're going to use to actually, do the thing, which was hit the bad guy. So whereas on the one side, I hit the bad guy is boring. This is okay. It's not boring, but it's gone so like ridiculously meta and gamist that it's just dragging the thing down. And if you have lots of players,
then it's compounded.
Then it's compounding the problem you just had. So, like I said, I don't think it has to be about simulationist systems where it's so complex people are working out all their choices. I think even relative, Marvel Heroics are relatively straightforward. So Fate is a super straightforward system, but because of the way they are designed, they lend. And like I said, and 2D20 for me, we don't mind this because we like playing the game. We are quite happy to go into combat and kind of like combat brain, and then come out of it and do the role playing stuff. But for me, 2D20, when people criticize 2D20 for having too many meta-currencies and too many options, I think they're bang up. They're absolutely spot on. That doesn't bother me,
right?
But I do agree with those people that can be a flaw.
I think you make a good point that first off, there's no system that's bad player proof.
No,
and I'm willing to make the sacrifice of I'm willing to make the meta sacrifice, to have that persistent meta layer at the table, because within reason for, what I like at my table, obviously what my players and I like for 2D20, because what I get in return for that cost is more player engagement and more investment in the building of the story outside of your own character. That's another thing that I tend to not like about combat as well, is that in a lot of, and again, I think that I think some systems, not so much incentivize, but they enable. How's that? Yeah. They enable this, that combat is even though you're doing it in a group, your characters are a group, it's solitary. There isn't a whole lot, every once in a while you get games where, I remember in third and fourth editions, flanking was a really big deal because of the bonus that it gave you, but then also there were certain class powers and feats that were triggered by and enhanced by and synergized with flanking. And so I remember, that was something that would encourage players to plan with one another. Okay, great. But in most cases, at least my experience for a long time with 5e, my recent experiences with Vampire the Masquerade, there isn't a lot of teamwork. And if there's one thing that like friends of mine who are in law enforcement that I've played lots of games with, and friends of mine that are veterans also, who some of whom actually were deployed to war zones. I never was, but I was taught that you when you're shooting at people but being shot at, it's a teamwork exercise, or you get dead, or you shoot the dude next to you that you're not supposed to shoot. You're supposed to shoot the guy not dressed like you, not the one who is. And so when I see combat where it's like everyone's just kind of acting willy-nilly on their own, good committed players, that's a different issue if you have those. But I like I said, I'm willing to pay the price of that persistent meta side of things, because it creates, it puts a thumb on the scale, as I'm so fond of saying, that incentivizes that.
I have to say we're not meant to be talking about good things. The Marvel, I'll say these now because we can remember to ask you about the Marvel multiverse system, which I absolutely panned for being horrific. And okay, I haven't played it. I played it myself, running multiple characters. You were incentivized in that to do teamwork. Okay, it didn't work. There was lots of problems with it, but at least
they were trying to do that.
Yeah, I think they may accidentally have removed some of those options. Tried to fix it, but that genuinely does have that, because you're right. Yeah, teamwork's not a thing. I mean, 5e, my players will do flanking, but it's more of a case of it's the road. It's like Brian trying to be right. We have to be opposite each other. We have to be proper. We're not allowed to do this or something. But at least that kind of, there's some planning aspect. That's awkward when we're not using a map, because it's hard to do flanking when you're not using a map.
Yeah.
But
Try
yeah,
to keep track of that.
And I think it helps if you've got a rogue. If you've got a rogue, the rogue's like, one of you has to be within 5 feet of the guy I'm trying to hit. Otherwise, I can't sneak attack every single round. So, but yeah, that's the extent of it really in 5e, isn't it? I mean, even if you've got a group of 4, I think that normally the idea that clerics should be like healing and supporting. But there's always that bit of thinking, no, but if that's all the clerics are doing, are they a bit waste of time?
There's another. I'll address that in a bit, but another complaint came out of that. My next. Do you have another complaint? Because I have another one.
I do, but you can go next because that was my
okay.
Mine
also is systems that are so complicated. And this has already been. I mean, we foreshadowed this, but systems that are so complicated where you're pawing through, especially as a GM, you're pawing through these massive character sheets. Yeah, exactly. Now on the other
book, I don't know the rules. When you're having to paw through the book or multiple books, and I'm like, oh crap, what's that in?
Oh
no, is this
horrid? Horrid.
That's when searches on. That's when doing it online or with a PDF would be better.
Sure. I guess with like a VTT, that would make your life easier if it was computing things for you.
Yeah.
Well, that's a nightmare. And I think the trouble is, I guess this could happen in level basis. It could happen in any system where there are just so many options, and you have like the desire to amass this fictional pile of super abilities then becomes the desire to use all of those things or have to work through them and then keep track of all the numbers for them. And that is that's a nightmare. And for on the GM side, when you get characters that are higher up in level in a level-based system, and you are dealing with any system almost, but you're trying to give them worthy adversaries, managing multiple competent higher level adversaries is a nightmare. And then that contributes to pawing through rule books, and it contributes to that slow grind.
Yeah, the one I hate for this is spells in 5e. Because for a start, the players never know all their spells. So then they're either looking up their spells or they're asking you, the GM, their spells as if you memorize the entirety of all the spells. Which at least there's only one main book with all the spells. It's not like 3 or 4 where they'd be all over the place.
Yeah, as you add more things.
But then it's the monsters. If you've ever got a spell casting monster where it's like, here's all the cool stuff, and go, and here's the list of spells. What do those spells do? So then you either have a choice of kind of running the monster below par by only using the spells what they do, or just using their main abilities, or having to paw for the rule book constantly where your players are doing something. I am listening. Oh god, what does this cloud kill?
I had
that's so naff.
There was an encounter in Pathfinder Kingmaker book 4, I think. Anyway, whatever, like that matters. Where the party was confronted by whatever. They fought a 10th level or 10th or 11th level evoker. That's a lot of spells. It's Pathfinder. That's right where Pathfinder is starting to break, but you haven't realized that your relationship, like your girlfriend's psycho or something like that, and you're still like in that headspace where you think everything's fine, and then you realize it's not, and it hasn't been for a while. Like that for 10th, 12th level Pathfinder is that part where you start to kind of twitch, but you don't realize like things have gone bad. And what I did when we got into those levels, and I wasn't happy with this, but this was, I had to do this because I wanted to keep the pace up and I didn't want to flip through books. I worked out like an action tree, if you want to call it that, of, all right, this evoker is going to do this in the first round of combat. He's going to do this in the second round of combat. Like these are the spells he's going to use. And I had a little bit of variety, but to minimize my need to flip through the books or to remove it entirely, I ended up taking this powerful adversary and kind of limiting his, limiting his actions, because there was no way that I could plan it and run it on the fly with the other things that were going on in that encounter. And I mean, it's bad enough for the players, but on the GM side, it's hard. And that contributes to things getting slowed down, and then the focus being on the rules, and again, not on the story. And the trouble is, you can have good players who will be ready or have like memorized because they have the time what their spells and powers and stuff do. You could have that, but like more rules heavy systems are still going to drag you in that direction because and especially like synergies between things, and like, does this affect that in this way or that? So yeah, I'm not a fan of the problems that ensue from, like, call it higher level combat.
All right, I got another one. I'm writing these down as we do them, so it'll make us easier to come up with solutions in the next one. Oh God, I was just saying. Oh yeah, this is more of a player thing, but I've seen it from, like, I've been the GM and the players done it. The thing where you roll to hit and you do nothing. That's almost every role playing game there is.
Yeah,
and it's terrible. Right as you'll go, oh, I can't believe I've been waiting 15 minutes for my go. Right, well, I'm gonna even if I'm gonna come up with this amazing, they're gonna use my broadsword. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna roll it down. Oh, I get a 2. What does that mean? Yeah, you do nothing. Oh, right, next player, you do nothing. I mean, like, if I'm playing a computer game, I might, if I miss, it's because I'm a moron and I stood in the wrong place or it was a bad shot. So I can miss, but then it's skill. It is player skill that has missed.
Yeah.
And if I hit a big scary monster and do no damage, it's because it's got a force field or it's got armor or I need to use a different weapon or so. It tells me I've done something wrong. In a role-playing game, you miss because, well, you rolled badly.
Yeah,
sucks.
That's maddening.
Yeah, or a similar thing to that is, which, because I've seen in Mutants and Masterminds or Savage World, you hit, yes, you do no damage.
Yes.
Sorry, what now? Yeah, you hit, but you do nothing. But I hit, yeah, but your next roll wasn't good enough. So you do nothing.
And now that is possible. That is possible in 2D20 because of the challenge dice and the way that they're used now. It's not probable.
Yes.
Like, because you can, in many of the systems, and like the system that I'm developing or the game that I'm developing, you can re-roll challenge dice by spending momentum or buying threat. It is possible to hit and do no damage at all, but it's not probable. On the other hand, like I guess there are two sides to that. There's what you just said. Probability just thumps you in the eyeball or pokes you in the forehead, and you just roll really poorly. Now, at least systems that have meta-currency like options to re-roll things or retry, at least it enables you to sally forth again and use a limited resource, meta or otherwise, to try again.
That's a solution.
Really, huh?
Don't we going into solutions?
Oh, sorry. I'll have to edit that out.
No, you can. You just forgot. You said you wouldn't do that and that you'd catch me for doing it.
Well, I'm going to delete that. No one will ever know.
Oh, rude.
I'll treat this video like Joseph Stalin, his enemies. But anyway, poof, all gone. Yeah. So I don't like that. I don't like it when probability just kicks you and when it's really dissatisfying in the story.
The flip side we end up with is, because when we play 5e, we use the Pathfinder rule of if you win by 10, you get a crit rather than having to rely on 20. Okay. But it does mean that when you've got ultra efficient characters, which we have because we're not morons, so we have decently efficient characters, we get a lot of crits. But then it just means combat goes quickly. So on the one hand, we've gone maybe too far the other way, and now I'm giving a solution. But I can't remember that. I've given a solution. It was meant to be an opposite way of doing it, but I can't remember. Oh, well, that went horribly wrong.
You just offer. So now we're even. Yes. Now we're even. I don't have to edit anything.
I had a train of thought, and I did. That's not where I went.
It was derailed.
Yeah.
What's something else? What's something else that you got on your list?
I've written something, but I'm not. I guess this is kind of similar to. I've written maths killing the immersion. I guess when certain systems are so mathsy, not necessarily complicated, but if they've got big numbers.
Math. I thought you said massive.
I'd added an S to the end of it, which of course confuses you.
Guess you did.
So like, particularly with like hit points and stuff, where if someone's doing multiple attacks in D&D, right? My first attack does I'm just going to add up sort of this much down. I'm just going to cross that right, and the next one, oh god, or like when someone's rolling in like a big spell, and it does 8d6, and that's a lot of adding, and you end up you're waiting because people can't do math quickly.
Yeah.
That can be irritating. That's one 2d20 doesn't tend to have.
No,
because even when you're rolling a lot of combat dice, the combat dice are either 0, 1, 2, or 1.
Yeah.
So it's quick adding. So yeah, that was the funny. People always used to moan about Shadowrun. Oh, Shadowrun, the dice, and the Shadowrun's ridiculous. Yeah, but at the end of the day, you might be rolling 20 dice, but you're just seeing how many got 4 5s or 6s, or 4 5s or 6. Same with Exalted. That's not difficult. That's not, it's adding, or weird systems where you have like multiplying. Oh, you add these two numbers, you're going to multiply it by this factor. And sorry, what now? Multiply. You said multiply. No, we don't do multiply.
No, we don't do that.
There's no multiply. Doubling.
Yeah.
It's like this beer and pretzels thing. I'm not multiplying.
I'm not a fan of that. I'm not a fan of that either. I think that there's a perception of power and like something is, high-powered characters. The idea of a high-powered character should be exciting. Like, oh my gosh, my character can do all these things and it can is so tough. But the trouble is that sometimes those high numbers just create a grind.
Yeah.
It's
false, because if you're doing bigger damage numbers, which is exciting, but then the bad guy's got 4 times as much hit points as they used to have. It doesn't matter. So this is the thing that used to bug me about, and still does to % about Pathfinder. 5e made it better, but that is the thing. When I look at Pathfinder, I think, oh yeah, Pathfinder's got so many cool things. And when you get a level 2, when you get like a +1 magic sword, it's not +1, it does 2d8 damage. That's really cool. But then you start again noticing that the ACs have gone up, and the damage on the enemies have gone up, and the hit dice have gone up. You think,
well, that was the problem with 4th edition.
Yeah, I'm not actually doing. Oh, I am doing more damage, but it's just the combat's taking as long.
Honestly, it's like inflation.
Yeah, it's like an arms
it's
race.
like, oh, you're making more money. Yeah, but it's worth less. You're doing more damage. Yeah, but the thing can withstand. I'm doing twice as much damage, but it can withstand 2.5 times the damage.
Yeah.
And so over time, it's a lie, actually. That's my other thing I'll go to is the grind. The grind. I can't stand that, where you just are in this mode where you're just trying to attrit numbers.
Yeah.
And that's where these systems that have big numbers, which seem like flashy things, they actually result in creating the opposite at the table, because they just take forever. And nothing interesting is happening. And that's another thing also, is when you have I think the grind happens, that is a long, protracted, one-note combat encounter. And especially when you have a GM or players are like, well, that's the rules, we got to stick with it. And then you want to go crazy. I think the grind only happens in systems where there isn't a lot of, you have big numbers and there isn't a lot of variability for other things you can do in the combat to bring it to a resolution. And to me, it never seems satisfying. Like as GM, when I've sensed that, like when I ran 4E, when I ran the higher level Pathfinder stuff, it was never satisfying to me, even though I felt it in myself, like, oh crap, this is just the grind here, just to be like, okay, you guys win. Like that never felt like a satisfying resolution, even though we were all tired of it. So yeah, systems that create a grind, I can't stand.
It's funny that some computer games have actually taken that, and then they do it with bigger numbers, because you can go for a lot more combat. Like we've said, it was 15 minutes for another player to come around. Your computer game, it could always be you playing, or if you're playing online, there's loads of other people playing at the same time. But they've taken that grind to the next level, because you'll just have the numbers popping up as you're hitting something, and you can see its health bar slowly going down. You think, but this is silly. This is, can I get its health bar to the bottom before my health bar goes to the bottom? And the more I hit it, these numbers are popping up. And that's where they've taken it from. They've taken the D&D. Actually, this isn't, at some point, that isn't fun, unless you're really obsessed with sort of min-max and how much damage you do. This is properly just a grind. And then like 4E, they went, yeah, that's brilliant. Let's bring that back. Yeah, you could have done something different though. I have got another one. This is quite a funny one. I'll just see if this is true to your combat. So a combat takes place. The combat exists in a featureless room with no furniture in it whatsoever, on a flat 2D plane until the combat ends. Does that sound familiar?
Oh yeah.
Now, actually, at that point, you think, "Oh God, I'm the GM. That's my fault."
Yes.
But that's a good chunk of combat.
Yeah.
That just
Combat that it focuses on the character action only and ignores features, terrain. It ignores location and
yeah. When I
ignores the
wrote that, I
incredible
was like,
impact of location.
I wrote that
That
and
is a
went, "Oh
GM thing, totally.
crap, that's me. I've been
Yeah.
doing that, and
Yeah, there's no system that does that to you. That's a GM.
yeah,
So this
um,
is good. We have some problems that stem from system. We have problems that stem from player and GM reaction to the demands of system, like complicated systems where you're like, crap, I need to go and memorize these things in order that I don't have to flip through books, or you end up flipping through books. We have bad player stuff, and here we have maybe bad or maybe just
it's
GM who's
possibly
not thinking.
lazy. Yeah.
Yeah,
But that was the point, because when you started bashing on 5e, I was like, okay, 5e combat isn't amazing, but there's worse. But
sure.
I'm not having you say that this is a 5e problem.
No, it's not.
This
You're
is
right
a
about that.
role-playing game problem. And like I said, a good chunk of this stuff here, most of this isn't system. Most of this is player and GM fault.
That's where I said, like, there are reactions by players and GMs to systems, like where there are where systems are complicated and multifaceted, or that there are multiple aspects of the system spread across multiple books. The players then react in the manner that you would expect them to. They're not masters of all of it, and so they continually turn to these things, and then that has an effect on combat. That I wouldn't blame the players. I would say that is a natural reaction to a situation that's rooted in the system, but not describing what your character is doing and just saying, oh, roll die 8 such and such damage, like, roll DC 14 such and such save, and that's what the player says. And if my
Actually,
player who I have and if my player in my group who does that is listening, I'm saying this on purpose.
I'll link that into one last one, and then I'll come back to you, because we said earlier, I hate it when the player just goes, I hit.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's because the system doesn't give you much else to do. So I'll come back to 5e. Actually, and this works for a lot of 2d20. When you only have one actual option. So actually, in a lot of 2d20 things, you do only I shoot or I hit it. The interesting stuff becomes after you've hit it. You can do all the cool stuff with momentum. But initially, mostly all you can do is attack. In 5e, this is like, if you're a fighter, well, you can hit something. You could choose which weapon you're using, but we all know you're going to use the one which has the highest number. Well, the magic one. You're going to use your magic one. Now, at least if you're like a wizard, you have a choice of different spells. If you're a battle master fighter, actually, forget what I just said. You have the most fun of any character class is, because I'm going to do the disarm thing, and no one else can do this disarm thing, just me, because I'm a battle master.
Yeah, well, the character I'm playing right now is a two-handed fighter. So I'm just running around with two-handed sword.
Yeah.
It's the same thing every time.
And I think that's then will lead to the I hit thing. And that's then is a system problem. If the only thing that you can, and you kind of hit on this earlier, if you haven't got other meaningful options, but really all you can do is, I guess I hit it. Then that's when you get the boring combats, because people don't have a bunch of this. You can see what we're saying. We have this awkward thing. On the one hand, if there's too many choices, the game gets slow and but if actually there's only one decent choice, then it's so
well, then it puts the player in the position of like, oh, how many different ways can I describe this? Now I do think that, it makes sense that if you're in the military and you're a sniper, you're not running around using grenades. You're a sniper. That's what
I hope you're not running around.
Right. Something has gone wrong if that's happening. It's like if you're on a gun crew in the field artillery and you're having to use your small arm, something has gone wrong. You would rather be using the howitzer. You don't want to be, it's so, yeah, that makes sense. So there is that balance of like, well, my character's like a sword and board fighter. That's what he does. Yeah. That's a tough one. What else? Anything else? Because I think we've got a good.
No, I think we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think we've got 10 things on this list. Wow. So that's going to take us a while to go through with here's either systems have fixed it, or if it's not a system problem, this is how we can try and
A
fix
behavioral
it.
issue.
I think there are systems that have tried to fix it that have caused new problems. I'm just going to throw this one in here quickly so we can
Do it.
I remember Exalted trying to fix the. Yeah, it was Exalted with first place. So try Exalted. It was the first place I saw it anyway. Exalted trying to fit the system with the idea, right? Stunting. If you describe what you're doing, you will get extra dice. I like that. That's a nice thing, right? If you describe it simply, you get a dice. If you just go nice big flowery description, and I think they've done better over the generations, saying, right, if they just keep saying the same cool sounding thing, you don't give them the bone. They've got to be saying something different. It's got to be cool and like blah blah blah. Then that's that was good. The trouble was that was allied to a system that was such a grind and a chore and a ball ache to play that it didn't matter. But at least you could, they were trying, they had a good idea tagged onto them. What the rest of it was not the easy thing, because a lot of the rest of stuff, like complicated systems where you have to look for all these pages and they get really mathsy, and it has all of that. But it did have this one nice, but there's an example of, where a system's actually gone, we've got one good idea, and then they've done all of the other bad stuff. So, but I've tried implementing that into other systems, and players just get lazy and they still just do I hit it. Oh, don't forget, if you do I hit it hard. Yeah, let's just.
And then you say I hit it hard, and then you roll like really poorly. I'm like, well, I guess I didn't. I tried to.
Yeah, that is actually a massive problem with it. I do I'm going to jump off this thing. I do a backflip, and then I spin around and I hit it, and then, I missed.
Well,
yeah,
that's why usually
describe after.
One of the norms at my table, and this is just has developed, and it's whether I'm running it or someone else is running it, is like in a combat encounter, when whichever character like fells the thing. All right, how'd you kill it? You did to describe, to put a little bit in there. I will throw one last thing into, and you can do. So this is number 11. This will be cool. It will go to 11. Nigel Tufnell would approve. Yeah.
If only most of these combats went to 11.
They went to 11. Is combat that frankly that must use a grid.
Yeah.
Not just maps, but must use a grid. Combat systems where it doesn't function, like you're over a barrel so much to try to make it function, theater of the mind, or you're being unfair to your players because the system is built to have little, people counting off things and figuring out, like you said, fiddly flanking bonuses or fiddly things like sight lines and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it's very, very wedded to a grid and facing. If you can't run a simple combat theater of the mind, that I think that's a problem.
That's why I think like 5e I can run theater of the mind thing. But Pathfinder I think you can, but it's hard. 4e,
nope.
No, you cannot run 4e theater of the mind, because it's totally designed to be done on a grid. You've got things about the guy next, you got like rules. If I hit this guy, the bloke next to hit.
Yep.
It's super specific about all of the squares and stuff. So yeah. And that's why 4e is an awesome combat simulator. Yeah. It's not a good role playing.
No, it's great. We've said this. It's a great skirmish minis game. That's it. 100%. And if you treat it as that, you have a grand old time. Luckily, I mean, I don't know. There's like 43 people out there in the world who are still playing 4th edition. So I think maybe. But so cool. So what we're going to do then is you're going to share that list with me.
I am emailing it now.
Right on. And then we're going to read it. And then when next we record, we will come up with our pithy solutions to each of those. And you know what I think we ought to do? I think we ought to try to synergize here. We should min-max. No, we shouldn't min-max. But we should try to come up with solutions that would hit or encompass or draw together a few of them at once.
Yeah.
If possible.
Yeah, because like I said, we definitely there are some systems that have done a good job of trying to fix these. Although I feel the systems that fix one problem just cause another problem, like my Exalted example. So yeah, and like I said, 2D20, I think it totally for me fixes a bunch of problems with something like 5e, but then causes different problems.
Yeah.
I think you can solve a lot of these with GM and player involvement, engagement, experience.
We can't talk about the solutions, though. That's new business.
Yeah. Well, that's what we're going to look at next episode. See?
That's right. Very cool.
Setting up our next episode.
That's like a transition sentence between paragraphs, a cliffhanger on a TV show.
Yeah. Tune back in next time to see us solve the 11 problems we just talked about, which does make you wonder why we play role-playing games.
Thank you so much for listening. You can visit our show's homepage at anchor.fm/fluffncrunch. That's FLUFFNCRUNCH. We would really appreciate feedback and reviews on whatever podcasting platform you're listening to this on. Thanks so much.